And I want to hear your question.
Yeah, well, that's the question. It's like, how are we sitting?
I don't know.
So in theater, there's always a couple of bells, so I'll just continue ringing as
Yes, you too.
as the contemporary master of ceremony.
I was usually having trouble
She's your disruptive
hearing.
Yeah, so welcome to our first panel, which I'll be moderating, and I think my main task will be to track time. I think like the question is like, how are we seated? And here or in the audience, I think you speakers can be free to do whatever you want. I thought I'd stay here, so I have like these wonderful. Enough bells. I have these wonderful.
meditative, by the way.
These wonderful signs that I'll signal to you to kind of tell you when you're about to.
So
we have enough time.
Signal.
So we have enough time for discussion. So our first sharer of propositions will be Matthew Goulish, who's, I'll also introduce only very briefly so we don't lose too much time. You have the CVs. But just to say a few words, he's a writer, dramaturg, and a sometime performer. Is the expression here, based in Chicago. You have the word.
Oh, thank you. I'll just get right to it then. I want to read, these, something that was written before the unpoliceable unfoldings of the fountain that we've lived through for the past few hours. And so might not stand up well next to that. But I'll interject with and end with notes taken in the past hours. A problem I face as a teacher of creative writing and studio arts, engagements that require me to speak about creative production in ways that encourage it by elucidating its reception, involves the challenge of fitting words to experience. Contemporary art critic Jerry Saltz recently wrote of the dominance of zombie art history. He meant, I think, terminology persistently applied to objects and experiences better understood through more exact language and exacting observation. The term sculpture, for example, we find deployed in describing an increasingly unwieldy category of object or event. Beyond that definition problem, such terms entrap us in a conceptual limbo of miscategorization. Mark Wilson, in Wandering Significance, describes the amphibolic, or growing in two directions at once, problem of the concept. It suggests a shared definition across physical and mental, or concrete and intangible valences. The terms sculpture and painting, through an act sometimes referred to as classical gluing, contrive to describe both the thing made and the state of mind of the maker. To paint a painting, sculpt a sculpture, states of mind and sets of actions shared by all who undertake the thus named project. If we try to define commonalities, we reach a regression of simplifications concerning surfaces, dimensions, materials, methods of altering, qualities of attention. We believe that communication necessitates this rounding off of edges, that such generalities pose no threat to serious inquiry. As one can, I think, discern the frame of mind of the maker in the made, or so the made would want us to seem to want us to. I want to begin with that, dispensing with any other category or concept and turning to more pointed predicates such as clearing, patching, skipping, dodging, matching, glossing, serving, opening, illuminating, extinguishing, solarizing, lunarizing, as Nietzsche might say, feeling, leaving, reaching, or even take a more distanced view and preparing. I find encouragement for this alternative lexicon in Whitehead's ideas about the value of feeling, in the reconciliation of what the nomenclature releases, allows, and makes possible in process and thought. But it goes without saying that tests of accuracy, or to borrow a term from the poet Wallace Stevens, appositeness, all bear on the simple act of naming. A knot begins to take shape as this balancing act between appositeness and unfolding presents itself as the first of several questions to follow in the wake of a seemingly cheerful proposal for unleashing vocabulary, the problem of replacing one predicate with another, if that deferral is a problem, for the sake of the promise of a wider method. As Wallace Stevens noted in Effects of Analogy, the imagination does not require for its projections the same amount of time that reason requires. But now I want to depart from what I wrote and make a problem of this question of replacing, because it struck me in the first sentence of the Nietzsche that we looked at that he proposes in parallel two word clusters. The first, feeling, willing, thinking, that becomes replaced in the second part of the sentence with sustaining, appropriating, expelling, as if feeling becomes sustaining, willing becomes appropriating, and thinking becomes expelling, as a way of reinscribing this idea of the unity of the self. So as a way to consider the relation as the product of this micro-investigation, I want to borrow a concept from my friend Bronislaw Yakovlevich, who proposes that we replace notions of chronology or something happening after with notions of geology, something happening on top of, as a strata-like addition. So this makes a problem or replaces the idea of replacing, such that sustaining doesn't replace feeling or expelling doesn't replace thinking, but becomes a kind of geological strata on top of it. So you have both thinking and expelling, or thinking that is expelling, rather than expelling instead of thinking. In the beginning of this book I bought over there at a discount last night, The Aims of Education, Alfred North Whitehead talks about education as being a struggle against inert ideas that he defines in part by ideas that are received without being thrown into fresh combinations. So I would say that fresh combination is maybe what I'm striving toward in these thoughts that I might try to spin toward a kind of proposition to combine in relation rather than to replace. So if we think about a painter such as Jackson Pollock, it's very important that we continue to call his work painting because of the way that it expanded the definition of painting. So we don't want to replace painting with some other concept, but we might want to stratify it by saying it's painting that is solarizing, or painting that is releasing, as a layering on top of, as a way of redefining or throwing into a new proposition. So by way of spinning toward proposition, I thought about my current friend and former student, Alberto Aguilar, who's become a fairly successful artist back in Chicago, who was a painter, but at the point at which he found himself working a full-time job and married with 4 children, he realized he had to come up with a new way of painting that included his family. So he discovered this act of stacking unlikely household objects on top of one another and photographing them in a way that I could say now is an action that is also an object and a state of mind of sculpting, stacking, rushing, arranging, recording. And so with this idea in mind that the proposition precedes its subject, I now discover that Alberto's work was a proposition waiting for my subject, which is this idea that it was a kind of a pre-existing metaphorization of what I'm talking about. Terminology can become, or vocabulary can be, in the sense of, Whitehead quote, science in the modern world, in the final chapter, requisites for social progress. In the Garden of Eden, Adam saw the animals before he named them. In the traditional system of education, children name the animals before they see them. So this is the animal, this stack of objects photographed that I'll now name a geological approach to this problem of predication, that we think of concept stacking the way Alberto stacked. I'll show you what I mean on the piano bench. Book I bought last night, let's say Water Bottle and Watch. And
You had nearly 10 minutes.
what's that?
You had 10 minutes now, just to give you a hint of time.
That's 10 minutes. That's been 10 minutes. I'm gonna just photograph it. And then I'll say this is art. Flash was on there. That'll prove that this happened. To have something that I can say was existed as a state of mind and a work of art, both, and existed in what Wallace Stevens referred to as in the flickering between is and was.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So we have 15 minutes, a bit more than 15 minutes to discuss.
So we're going to discuss right now?
Yeah, I thought.
Oh, okay. I thought we heard all of them in that. Okay, we can discuss right now.
No, Masters of Ceremony say no.
Okay. I didn't mean to, I just sat here because I needed to spread out. I didn't want to disrupt the glorious cloud of chair arrangements. Did that make any sense to anybody who's not me?
Yeah. How to enter. Your last sentence made me think of something. It's like flickering between what is and was. I think it's so beautiful, and it reminded me of something that I read. I think in What Animals Can Teach Us About Politics, on like thinking about animality as this dynamic form between what is and what could be. And sort of that flickering too, and how what you've arranged, or you know, the whole gesture and the whole like movement of your thought, definitely explored that vibratory field between, like that complexity of time between what is present and what got folded into the present. But also, I really felt like there was such a sense of what could come. So that like sort of like extension of time that way as well towards futurity.
Thank you. I think I came at that from a sort of reverse angle, and I don't want to lose the problem, which is or continues to be a real problem, which is how to speak to students about their work in ways that do or don't engage this issue of zombie art history. You know, because I find that more and more students don't think of themselves often as painters or sculptors or whatever, but rather people who make stuff or do things, trans-genre, transdisciplinary. And so to what extent is it important to engage that traditional vocabulary as a way of validating what was done and expanding the definition? Or to what extent is it important to dispense with them? Like at what point do they become inert or become habits that need to be reinscribed?
But I think what you're saying, it seems to me that I see what you're saying from like the angle that you came at it.
Yeah.
But I think that maybe what is at stake there is exactly how that sort of creating the narrative of the work limits what it could become.
Yeah.
In a way. So it is a concern for the potential of the work, which is its futurity in a certain way, like how, we are ghosts of the future in a way. So like the work is a ghost of what the next work could be, or the next work, and that can be closed down before it even happened.
Yeah, beautiful.
With these, narratives that we build around it. So
this is sort of a propositional thing, right? That's the way the future is, and the future is inscribed, and it's very important, I think, to keep that engaged in the sense of speaking about a student's work or any work in relation to not just the past.
Yeah.
It's not just a footnote.
Yeah.
It's not just a commentary. It's an avenue, right, as well.
Yeah, I was very moved, and also by what Chenga is saying, and thinking about two thoughts. And they have to do, we mentioned yesterday that the question of rigor comes up. It's in my mind all the time, but not a rigor prescribed, but a rigor emergent. What is that? And so two instances. One case, it seems to me, and this is more in the context of the PhD than in the MFA, just this first example. It seems to me that the traditional academic writing proposition has been involved in making the student parade knowledge forward. That's what we call the methodology chapter, or the literature review chapter. And it's been very important to me to talk about what doesn't have to appear in the writing, which doesn't mean what doesn't have to be done. So what kinds of conversations can we have about what has to be learned in order for the thinking to happen, but what doesn't necessarily have to be paraded? So you probably have to do your literature review no matter what, because you need to know the stuff. But does it have to be performed? And I think about this specifically because I have a student who has written absolutely, I've mentioned this to a few people, I think absolutely brilliant, extraordinary PhD in a language neither he nor I understand. And I know it's brilliant, but I've been thinking, how do I know? Because nothing in the educational system supports me to know that something I don't understand. But I've seen all the work on the edges that went into allowing this kind of proposition, or whatever you want to call it, to exist. And it truly is an unsettling of any kind of convention, because it can't be citational. Or at least if it is, I don't understand it enough to know how it is citational, because it doesn't operate in a language. So that's just one thing. The other thing is then, okay, so the question of technique, what do we do as teachers who want to learn to facilitate that? And I had a really interesting experience this term, where I taught a course called What is a Cuff? And for 13 weeks, I speculated what a philosophical cuff would be for 13 philosophers. So like Derrida's cuff would be the supplement, Barthes' cuff would be the punctum, whatever, Whitehead, so I went through that. But then I asked the students to create a cuff with the speculation that perhaps the curatorial gesture was the cuff. And what was really interesting about that is that, again, it required them to have a sense of a certain kind of tradition. Like, if you're going to find out that, I don't know, the punctum is Barthes' cuff, then you need to read Barthes to understand that. And then if you're going to think, so the questions were 13 also questions to art. So what is a sculptural cuff? What is a new media cuff? What is a painting cuff? What is a photo cuff? And sort of. And what I found that was super interesting was that not only was the work produced excellent, for the ones that did it. But it wasn't in their discipline. Almost none of them did the work in the material area that they would usually work in. So anyway, so your thinking really got me thinking about that.
Yeah, I think a little bit about the problem, the impossibility of teaching. I mean, I think a lot, that's all I think about. That one of the things that impossibilizes teaching is the inability to see the future. So the teacher sees the future in relation to the present. So I'm teaching students to engage in a future that I'm assuming is going to be more of the present, which it's not going to be. It's going to, because the present is dynamic and it's changing, and it's a future that they will make. So if I do see the future at all, I see it in the misunderstandings of my students. I want to say, like, the future is your misunderstanding. I don't even know what a book is going to be. How can I teach you to write it? I know what it is now, and I know what it was, and I can teach some of that. But what it will be is your misunderstanding of what a book is now, or your idea of what a book could be that it's not, or you're seeing something that I'm not seeing. And so that becomes somehow, I don't know if it can even be affirmed as much as permitted. It's not a kind of, it's more belief than knowledge, I suppose. So then you end up teaching belief, or a kind of faith, I suppose.
As a teacher, acting teacher, I think the most important thing, maybe the most important thing to give them is then to trust them in their future. To open up a field where they learn that I and they can trust that future will come.
Yeah.
And this is, when this pops up,
Yeah.
I think this is an ability you can teach other people more.
Yeah.
I mean, what it made me think of was the way of rephrasing that problem is the question of how to inherit, like in order to create a future or to create an opening or to enable that Jamesian leap somehow to jump somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think it's really beautiful and important that we start with the question of transmission in that kind of in that kind of sense. But I was wondering, just like one question about the use of geology, because you were like contrasting time
Chronology.
and chronology versus geology, and like my first sensation was like kind of stifling sensation, because if you layer like on the one hand it's like I can connect to it because it's additional, it's like it's the empiricist and,
right.
But on the other hand there's something stifling in this metaphor of geology,
Right.
where you'll always carry everything on your back and you can't like undo anything.
It is
so
rock,
where does undoing come in?
Yeah.
There are volcanoes.
True.
Yes.
They wreak a lot of havoc.
It just, I don't know if I can address that, but to go back to Alberto's example, I think the discovery of stacking up unlikely household objects and photographing them, it answered so many questions at once. And one of them was that it wasn't just a one-time act. It was a kind of technique or strategy that had a future, that he could see that they could make, it could be seriality, and his kids and family could engage in it almost endlessly. So there was a kind of like sustainability to it. But at the same time, I recognize, because I know him, that he has an inexhaustible knowledge of conceptual art and history. So he would know that he could recognize at the same time a kind of value to it in that. Anyway.
I like that method too, though, because it's sort of, sorry, your hand up, but it also kind of
initiates this method of counterfactual logic, right? That sort of counterfactual reasoning. So you're taking objects that you wouldn't normally.
Right.
So you're opening up this brain. You're opening up a new, between cause and effect. You're opening up a new chasm there.
Mhm.
It's this sort of counterfactual chasm. And so I like that what Mr. Aguilar is doing just for that reason. He's forcing you into that counterfactual sort of thought.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, go ahead. You
but
were-
how do you activate these questions on your students? Because I know that also some students may not be interested on those questions. You know, they are really ready for you to teach them. You know, or to
Yeah.
receive material. Yeah,
I
like, you know,
find
whatever
that there's a balancing act between imparting actual knowledge and information and just getting out of the way. Because one of the ways to get out of the way, I find, is to say, like, we've got this text, and I can interpret the text, I can mediate the text for you, but you also have your own direct experience with it. So, in a sense, the book is your teacher, and I'm your teacher. But you're going to spend time with the book, and I won't be there. So what you discover in it, I want to hear. And so I find it's just a kind of sleight of hand, taking myself out of the way. There's always something that steps into that breach. There's always a teacher in the room. And if the teacher steps back, then another one will take on that role.
Sandra and Brian, and I think then we probably have to.
I have been struck recently by the work of Wes Jackson and Wendell Berry in their book on the virtues of ignorance. And in that book, they talk about the importance of an ignorance-based worldview, and that so much of the way we've constructed education is around a knowledge-based worldview of ours. But yet there's so much that we don't know, but we don't teach with what we don't know. We don't teach toward that not knowing.
Yeah.
And especially in light of this, issues in sustainability.
Yeah.
And, it seems imperative that we start to develop strategies for teaching about our own ignorance.
Yeah.
And so I'm really intrigued with what you've started here.
Yeah.
I just feel like, boy, we need to really give a lot of energy to that.
Just very briefly, there's, William James, my hero, who said this distinction between knowledge and acknowledgement. Like, there's so much we know that we don't know about the universe, but we know there is a universe. And we know that there are things we don't know about it. So you acknowledge this sort of vast thing. But then that acknowledgement is different from the knowledge that you can actually express about it. Right. So ignorance is not necessarily, it's something that can be broken down in that way. No?
Okay.
Jane was waiting too. Do you want to jump in?
I don't know. I just because I'm also not in university teaching, but I work with a lot of artists, and their careers and things like this. So when I think of sustainability, I also think of stamina, because a lot of artists I work with, because it's so difficult to do everything. It's like their stamina goes to a certain point, and then we start losing them. So these voices start dropping away, even though they're there, but they're not there, blah, blah, blah. But stamina, and then I don't know enough about this word. Andrew talked about it, prudence, because that sentence is also
in the nature.
watchful prudence. And a prudence,
That first sentence.
I
Yeah.
don't really know, that word is so strange, I don't quite get it. But part of me is wondering for watchful prudence is also being aware of what is sustaining, what is giving stamina, which, like, these are words that I'm getting at, but there's so many things circling around them, I'm not quite sure where to land with them, but stamina also seems like it's different than sustainability, I don't know. There's some kind of, maybe the word is appetite for it.
The appetite. But I think in the conversation about sustainability, your own production, your own energy is part of that ecology that needs to be addressed. That's meaning sustainable in the sense that you can see yourself enacting that future somehow, or that the future carries you. I mean, I think the great revelation of, was this Deleuze who said something about Kafka, that everything new, or that the new writing doesn't feel like writing somehow. It feels wrong. It just feels too easy. That was like the worst quote of Deleuze ever. But it's like, you know, Alberto's work is it's like play. It doesn't feel like work anymore, and that's part of its sustainability. So it gives you energy rather than taking your energy. It's like it makes time rather than taking it. It's like a gift that like makes you like forget about, you know, checking your email or whatever. It's just like it's like a battery that didn't exist before, giving you the energy. So that's part of that sustainability question. I think it's your own engagement.
Thank you, Matthew. Perfect. You want to stay there? Next we have Susanne Valerie Granzer, who is an actress and professor at the Max Reinhardt Seminar in Vienna, the University of Music and Performing Arts. So has a background in acting and in philosophy too.
First of all, thank you for the invitation to Erin and Brian and the Whiteheadians. And I took a Whiteheadian laboratory literally, and so I thought maybe to tell a story, as far as I learned now, is possible in this context, but in a usual academic context it would not be accepted. And so I will read, made an extract of a small story, which the book I wrote started with. And I ask you now, please, be so kind, and would invite you to close your eyes, because it makes a difference if you close your eyes and listen, or if you look and hear at the same time. I'm talking about the note, and it's called Double Stalemate. Hannah J., a drama student, is struggling one of the long monologues in Friedrich Schiller's romantic tragedy, The Maid of Orleans. There is no way to sweeten the experience. The rehearsal is grueling for everyone involved, and not for the first time. Each attempt at the play is polished and conventional. It is full of cliches caught up in itself, locked into itself. Working on the play is like running a treadmill. It is not going anywhere, a stalemate, a pain. Admittedly, the text is difficult, awkward. The language and the piece itself have an unfamiliar feel. They raise more than one aesthetic and thematic question. Nowadays, other theatrical forms have led to a radical caesura in classical drama. Even Friedrich Nietzsche's The Twilight of the Idols attacked Schiller as the moral trumpeter of Säckingen. The power of logos has been dislodged by the logic of the fragment. The fact is, the girl is struggling on stage. She cannot find a way into the text, the role, the situation, or the emotions. Her words are made of paper, her body of clay. There is no flow, no groove, no play. Everything still feels constructed, fabricated, empty. It stumbles, falters, stagnates, and gets stuck. It is not pleasant to see this reflected in her face. The
No talent verdict hangs in the air, the diffuse ghost that haunts so many beginners. Today she seems to have reached the bottom. Rehearsals might be ended any second now. Why torture ourselves any longer? Turning point, peripetia. Suddenly, without any warning or transition, the situation on stage changes. The young actor's figure grows, it becomes larger. It grows beyond its own actual size, suspends all perspective, and although she cannot lose her real size, her biological measurements, suddenly she fills the space. She penetrates the stage, feels it, fills it, until her limits burst, explode. Simultaneously, a spell is cast, a temporal undertow, as if time had suddenly condensed. Where only a second ago it was dragging on so laboriously. Boredom has disappeared completely now, as has dry uniformity. There is no longer a chronometer ticking out the seconds that march continuously straight ahead to the beat. Freed from linear order, time runs backwards and forward simultaneously, jumps erratically. Past and future are both equally alive. It is as if time has been given wings. The classroom has become still. No chairs move, no furtive glances towards the clock. All of that is forgotten. Not even a cell phone rings by mistake. All is silent now, everything hushed. All past misery is liquidated. The figure on stage no longer seems nondescript, her face no longer cramped, but clear, lively, diaphanous. All at once. Language and words open up. A strain is lifted. The words flow swiftly, playfully, as if they have just been formed. They reanimate the body from head to toe. The event of the play evokes and revokes, hides and reveals, becomes a curly question mark that the audience cannot escape. Reversing inside and outside, its border blur like time or like the very space of the moment, without dissolving their differences into the diffuse. Turnaround, last part. Right in the middle of this liberating, expanding and gathering, in the middle of this dissolution of interior and exterior, in less than the blink of an eye, the next turn, the next wrinkle in time. This time it takes the form of demolition, a completely unexpected interruption of play. Over, finito, done, curtain. Abruptly, with no warning, unforeseeable. It just happens as starkly as before, with just as little transition. Why does Hannah J. stop? Why now? At this moment of all times? Anger wells up. Anger and frustration. Why is she willfully destroying the moment just when her acting is truly felicitous? It is beyond comprehension. Ridiculous. Before one would have understood. There were plenty of times when she could have stopped, when perhaps she even should have stopped. Everyone would have been relieved. Everyone was hoping she would stop. But now of all times, the second everything starts going well, why? For no apparent reason, the actor on stage bursts into tears. But they are not Joan's tears. Rather, they belong to Hannah J. Clearly flustered, she cannot carry on, cannot continue. Once again, the auditorium becomes still. It is a different kind of stillness, an awkward stillness due to an incomprehensible, obviously intimate act. It is a confusing act, unsettling, and not at all sentimental. Embarrassment is in the air. Nobody really knows what to do, but no one laughs or makes one of their usual jokes. The tense stillness continues. After a while, the tension is broken by a tear-stained but clearly stubborn voice that obstinately declares, much to the surprise of all present, if that's acting, I don't know if I want to become an actor. First there is surprise, then irritation, a bizarre reversal, a strange and unexpected turnaround. It turns our expectance topsy-turvy. It is incomprehensible, disconcerting to go through all that agony, to resist becoming discouraged and giving up when the play is going so badly. And then, of all times, to stop when the play begins to flow, to break the effortless stream of creativity that cannot be constructed or made, that needs to come on its own. And instead of being happy to have felt it, instead of riding the wave, the kairos of the moment, there is obvious resistance. Resistance so strong that it leads to an interruption of play. So strong that it makes Hannah J. break into tears and speak out against her own desire to become an actor. Discreetly, the class leaves the rehearsal, leaving the student and her teacher alone. So, this was the first part. Oh, my dear, 5 minutes. Because I looked at my watch and I read it in 12 minutes, and this was 15 minutes?
No, we have 5 more minutes to make it 15.
Oh, so to me, no, that's perfect. No, I start with the second. I thought, how can I involve the audience or a little bit different as maybe usual. And therefore, I brought some tools with me. Tools are on the stage always players. They play with us. So, these are papers and pencils. My university gave them to me, very generous. Okay, so leave that. And then I have a clock. I would have preferred a sand clock, but this was too fragile to take with me. And now there's a bowl. And there is dice. And I tried to find the most childish one. Firstly, for a smile in this context, and then because I personally love very much Nietzsche's 3 transformations in the Zarathustra, from the camel to the lion to the playing child. And thirdly, you were talking yesterday about the great affirmation, the double affirmation. The dice always reminds me to the Würfelwurf. You help me with the English when the Nietzsche's the flow of the dice, the throw of the dice, and you cannot. We are thrown into with one in the constellation of our lives, and gamblers try to throw it again until they have their one. But we cannot do that. But what we can do is we can try to love the constellation of our lives. And amor fati is the word for that, or double affirmation. And so I thought if we throw a dice, so I would ask you now to use it in a little bit different way. There is 1, 2, and 3 points, and you can throw it, and then you have the time how long you can speak. But firstly, I would like to ask you to write down a word or a half a sentence you connect with what you have already heard, and then fold it, give it in a bowl, and then we mix it, and then another one is fetching one of the papers, reading it, and then throwing the dice, and then he has the time, and I pull the watch, and if time is over, you have a cut.
Super.
Is this okay for you?
Yeah. We have lots of time left, right?
I did so quick, as quick as I could. So, because this needs
So we should
time.
all come and get a paper now?
Yes? I can come and collect the paper. Who is ready? I'm ready. You're ready. Come on. You fold it so that nobody can see. Maybe, yes, that's good. 4 times. No, no, that's good. Yeah, just two, not 3.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Anyone need a paper? Thank you.
So viermal.
Das werden wir nicht schaffen. I think we have to continue. Okay, thank you. But it's great to have
But this
such a
is
lot
great. Because the archive can use it as well tonight.
Okay,
So
okay.
don't get rid of it.
Okay. Okay. Can you hold it then once more again? So below there is once more. Okay? So I think I turn it around and mix it. Oopsala. Who wants to be the first?
There's one left there.
Oh, where?
There's one.
Also, yeah, also, oh, no. Oops. Who wants to start? Who wants to start? You?
Yay.
Matthew.
So, play. Oh, 3. Yeah.
Do I have a time limit?
Yes, here it is.
So I have to
So-
talk for 3 minutes.
I have to talk for 3 minutes?
Yes.
Nobody was lifting.
This is the task. This is the task. This is the task. Read aloud, but please read aloud what you have.
Bewildered.
Okay, the watch is.
You have 2.
And nothingness.
Oh, okay.
Yes, please. Come on. Join me.
I've joined you. And so I should talk about bewilderment.
Here is the audience.
Hello, audience.
Changing the place. But if you prefer, you can stand inside.
All right. Okay. And so now I talk about bewilderment for 3 minutes.
Yes, please.
Oh my. In relation to the story.
You can demonstrate it rather than we're doing it.
You are
That's my first demonstration of bewilderment.
Okay, 3 minutes.
It was strong.
It's all right. Well, I think what I'd like to know about this story, the thing that bewilders me, where I think there is a moment of bewilderment, is the knot that this character experiences as they come into a realization that what they have inhabited is more than what they bargained for. And I think that this inhabitance has a bewilderment to it. There's a bewilderment maybe in this constellation is a form of realization that a reckoning has to take place, and a decision to either engage with that reckoning or to reject it. This character chooses to reject it. Now, I want to also just say that you're all facing me, but I'm facing this way, and I don't know if any of you have noticed that at least one of these apartments seems to be occupied by someone who experiences that excess in I hope that person isn't in this room. But
household object.
Thank you very much. Who wants to be the next? There are no 4 or 5 minutes, so the optimum is 3.
I just want to throw the die for somebody else. I just want to throw the dice.
Yeah, we can change the rules. Who wants to? And you want to throw the dice?
Is that okay? Can I do that?
So you're in the hands
Is that okay if I do
of
this?
Matthew.
Yes. Okay. You ready?
Yes.
Oh, they've been painted out.
Because I didn't want you to talk for 5 minutes before me.
I couldn't find the logic of it. Okay, you ready?
The logic is that it's 30 minutes. This was not my logic.
Okay, here we go.
Very tricky person. He's a good teacher.
So I got plea.
Oh, sorry. I have
Lee? Like EA?
P-L-I. P-L-I.
Oh, fault.
I don't know if it's fault. It could be plea. So, where's the bowl?
third one. How's the time?
We're good in time.
We're good in time.
Right.
Right, yeah, right, yeah.
But maybe we can collectively decide.
Decision is in the world.
All right, I'll do it.
Oh, that's great.
Does anybody ever lie about what's on the paper?
That could be the first one.
You want to just hold your.
Determine my best. No. Wait a moment.
It's adventurous.
Beautiful. So I have stillness, and I would like to go around the room and have everybody say something about stillness in relation to what we read. So Brian, would you begin, please? Stillness, please.
Ready.
Very good. Is that the best you can do?
That was pretty still.
Related to the text?
She said, can you say something about still? Did you hear it?
I heard.
Siglinda, do you have anything to think about stillness?
Encountering non-sensual, colorful engagements.
About music coming, no still sky, anything? Alba.
Overflowing.
Still full. When they break out of the linearity, when they're back and forth movement of time, there's both stillness and what about fixing? What about fixing?
Is this quote of the Les thinking about this student that he says like once you fold into the many speeds of the forces of life, then actually you become very a slow being. I wonder when the students stop the speed, maybe because he was not able to become more even slower and still more still.
So the intercession between dynamics.
Between what? Dynamics.
Holding in place.
Fear of flowing.
I was thinking about like when you trip. It feels still, but you're moving and you know the concrete is getting closer.
Thank you. This was a little bit tricky. Would I get in trouble?
You did it perfect. Who wants?
So we have like half an hour.
It is not more difficult than the other
hour.
session.
Or move on.
I wonder, it is not more difficult than before. Just a little bit changing the rules.
Oh, I'm very invited. Thank you.
You'll get one.
You want to help again?
Oh, someone else should have this joy. It's the yellow.
You want to throw it on your own?
Sure.
Sure.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. I promised and you didn't.
Promise one. So I have playfulness, duration, social subject. When I'm thinking of playfulness, I'm still inside of Brian's animals because I just had a couple of students present wonderfully the other day in class on his what animals teach us about politics.
Sorry.
Half of my minute is gone, my first minute is gone. And they sent a photograph, which I'll share with anyone because they knew I would be coming here, and they dressed up as cats. They painted their faces as cats for the day. And it's a class on political theology. So there was a way in which there was a playfulness that kicked into an unbearably painful time. And the performativity of their playfulness as cats, inspired by Brian's sense of the ludic play that animals who know the difference between what's the word, a nip and a real bite. That playfulness just brought into the performance of our class time a sense of energy again for politics, because we've been doing a lot of breathing together. And a lot of worry that all of our political work has been in vain. So yeah, I love bringing the sense of play back into politics at a time when duration is going to require some real endurance. And a time when our being social subject, our social subjectivity is at great risk. And we'll have to undergo and endure, I think, especially in this country, but I fear this is around the planet, some deep testing. And so perhaps this has always been the case, and now we rise to the occasion in new ways. So our social subjectivity, hopefully even building in this room with these risky experiments in which we're put on the edge of our own social activities and try to be playful, but feel rather like your student who wanted to just quit just when it all flowed. But still, let's not quit. Let's just take some times of stillness. Let's gather our social subjectivity in really animally wild new ways. And the buzzer should be going off by now. No, it's kind of a privilege. I have a captive audience. So I'm feeling a little like I wish I'd painted my face like a cat. And I really do some nipping here. I do think that what we're experimenting with.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you. I think like now time is...
Thank you very much for participating in this laboratory. And I really, this is very astonishing for me as an actress that there is some sort of shyness in this, because I am shy when I'm sitting in the audience and you are not shy at all. Hands up, and changing the rules, it's nothing different than before. So I wonder why this shyness pops up. So thank you very much.
Can I just say one thing, just quickly? So you recall yesterday we said we were anarchiving today. And so it'd be really great if we have a really nice set of some kind of potential in that bowl. And so if people keep that in their mind about this evening, when collectively all of us, not just the Sense Lab, is going to be doing something around the day. So don't throw them away, but think about it. Thank you, Susanne.
No, we have our last speaker who I'd like to introduce, which is Barbara Muraca, who is heavily invested in social and environmental philosophy, and I think we'll hear something about that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. After this, it's really hard to go back to talking, and I have been thinking of doing something different, but I didn't have any brilliant ideas. So I will be talking. It probably relates to what Catherine tuned us in her improvisation in terms of the times in which we're living. I'm not going really to read through the page because I assume you have it and you can move through that. I'm just going to say a few words about what's the background for that and more a kind of free association of thoughts than interweave with what we have been talking about today and yesterday. So what I have been doing in the last couple of years is to encounter what in Europe is called the degrowth movement, which was a very interesting experience for me because it's a word that whenever I use it in the US, people say it's depressing, it's negative, horrible, whoa. And the way I've learned it from France and Spain and Italy, Southern European countries, that it's a word that is super cool and liberating. And I started working there and making the experience with people who are all much younger than me and prepared the last international degrowth conference, not the last, the one before the last, in 2014 in Leipzig, in a way which was really an experimentation of alternative practices. They decided to prepare a huge conference which we had 3,000 people participating in that conference because we had to cap the participation, otherwise we would have had many more. And they decided to do it according to the method of horizontal decision-making processes, basis democracy, and consensus-oriented, although consensus orientation is much more complex because it really includes feelings and emotion, and we had to work on emotion every time we were discussing things. And I thought, we will never be able to do it, are you kidding me? With that specific timeline of preparing a conference. That happened, and that changed me and my way of thinking of revolution and social transformation. So this is the biographical experience that led me to think again through interweaving Foucault, Butler, and Whitehead in terms of what it means that we are living in a time in which the neoliberal phase of late capitalism is really about producing subjects who are entrepreneurial themselves. And this is something that is a risk that we all embody sitting here. Because being entrepreneurial oneself is no longer just a pretty straightforward quantification of stuff and commodification of stuff. It's a way of taking on the so-called critique of the artist going back to the 70s and making it into a flow that can be appropriated for generating profit. So that very creativity and qualitative aspect of that creativity can be appropriated and transformed into profit in a very easy way. So it's much more complex, the world in which we live now. Being entrepreneur of oneself is really about a transformation of oneself and one's subjectivities in a qualitative way, not only toward more stuff. This was the critique of growth from the 70s. The critique of growth that the degrowth people are articulating is also a critique of better, because the narrative of better is no better than the narrative of more. Is the whole debate about enhancement and self-enhancement and improving and a better life. I remember watching, do you know the story of stuff? There is this series of short videos about how things are being made and what flows into it from a political economy perspective. And they had a very nice story, the story of solutions, where they have these different paths. One is the path towards more, and the alternative path, is the path towards better. And I thought that just repeats and reiterates the very same narrative of being neoliberal subjects, of being produced as wanting better and wanting a different quality of life. So that's the first background. And I heard resonating as a contrast to that, what I am learning from the narrative of Buen Vivir in Latin America, from indigenous people. They're not talking about better. They are talking about the good life in the meaning of a Butlerian livability. How to survive as human beings, as a collective, as community, to live without occupying these social positions of constant improvement, of constant enhancement. how to survive there. And this is where I thought Butler is an interesting echo there, because she uses that about the heteronormative matrix, about the fact that if you're not one specific gender, you're not recognizable. You are not, because no one can see you, can read you. You're not, she says, intelligible. And I was thinking, can we apply that to being neoliberal subject? Is it possible to be in the society in which we live without occupying these social positions of not only more, but also better? Is it possible even to speak and being heard and being seen without embodying that narrative? This is why degrowth sounds so terribly depressing, right? And this is why I think it's very revolutionary, precisely because it tends not to repeat the narrative of better and improvement. And thinking with Butler, I was also thinking that she has a proposal or a proposition at this point too, which is the queer practices, which is not an alternative. You can never throw away, you can never exit your social position. What are you doing? And this is pretty much what we're doing here now. You can only try to embrace the possibilities that are out there, because to be human, you have to be seen, recognized, acknowledged by others. But you can shift these meanings. You can playfully, performatively shift the meanings by that difference and repetition, by every repetition, which is a novelty, has a novelty built into that. So there is always this, for Butler is a resistance, is a terrible resistance in a place of pain for existing. Shifting that possibility, shifting the coding of heteronormative narratives is the only way to survive, to be. This is where and that's the third step, and as I said, it's very much an association of thought, so there is not much of a systematic thinking here, where I think that Whitehead is bringing the third piece to this narrative, which is how that continuous repeating while shifting is called for from the future as something that breaks the present, the future that is not, except in the possible anticipation of what might be, except in the form of desire, except in the form of a desire which is not already in the possibilities of the present. So there is a lure of desire from the future that can break the way in which desire has been integrated into the neoliberal narrative, in the sense of improving, in the sense of enhancement, desire being functionalized towards commodification, functionalized towards creating more profit. So there is a way in which the call from a future which is not, but is the anticipation of possibility, which at the same time also embody all the past. So a kind of secularizing the two natures of God here, right? All that has been is being taken on by the consequent nature of God, which is the whole movement of the universe, and being given back as possibilities for the future every minute, every second, in every move, in every step. So there are hidden threads from the past which are not evident in the patterns of the life in which we live, which we might weave back into new patterns. But this, so I'm not sure whether that makes sense what I'm saying, but there's a dialectic between the past and the future. The call of the future might help us rediscovering threads which are hidden in this pattern and wave them into different patterns or shifting the patterns in different ways of embodying that contradictory space in which we cannot completely get out of that narrative, but we can embrace the narrative and shift it and break it in order to create other possibilities. When I'm thinking of the indigenous people talking about buen vivir, this is not new, it's super old. But that narrative from the past, which is being oppressed and destroyed and discriminated, is a narrative that calls for other possibilities in the future in different ways. I cannot just embody that in the way they embody that, but it's a call for breaking this. It's very chaotic what I'm talking about here, but it's supposed to be probably the way. And just to conclude and trying to summing up a little bit of that, living in the contradiction that whatever we're doing and talking in terms of focusing more on quality, focusing more on creativity, is already being what neoliberal biocapitalism is feeding onto, and knowing that this is a contradiction from which we cannot escape, but not escaping is also a strategy of resistance in terms of breaking exactly that mode of inhabiting that contradiction, opening path for alternative practices in that very narrative, learning from queer practices, for example, in that dialectic of alternative narratives from the past that can call upon us for new future possibilities to realize, but always in this multiplicity, in these little steps, in these little ways of shifting patterns, not at the great alternative narrative for a great alternative future, which again works towards the very same narrative. I don't know whether that makes any sense, but this is something I'm interested in working on, and I have learned how that might play out in the practices that I've experienced in preparing the Degrowth Conference, and that hint of negativity of the word, which might make it less easy to be appropriated as, again, a yes, we can narrative, as, again, as, whoa, let's do it, yay. Oh no, let's find a space to break that, to breathe, slow down, and go for a good life, not necessarily the better life. And rereading Nietzsche, and that's the part where I also thought that he refers to life as this continuous thrive and drive to better and grow, and I think he didn't get it very right at that point. Or maybe he did, because the very time in which philosophy and sciences started discovering life is the same time in which capitalism developed its power at its peak, which is based on using and exploiting life. I think Lazzarato has written something about that too. So it's not a case, it's not just by chance that life is intended as that incredible production towards more and better, because that reflects to a certain extent the same narrative of capitalism at its peak. Maybe there are different narratives there in the sense of creativity, in the sense of the move of life, which is not as woo, but it's a different way of finding always fractures and balances in that process. It's not growing, and it's not a bettering, and so I'm not even sure about that passage in Whitehead, to do that. Good and better. I'm critical about that, or I'm seeing that critical edge. Okay, I'll leave it here. And see whether there's anything meaningful in what I've said.
Yeah. You asked it many times, does it make sense what I say? I think that it makes a lot of sense, and at least for me, the way that I make sense of what you say is that when you say better, I think that I just translate it in my mind, because when you say better, I think that the definition of better in this context is not, it is actually worse, because as you add too much, too many things, what is the value of that, of those things, what comes with them? And I'm thinking here about industrialization and about the way we treat the environment and the
One of the folks working on degrowth, they use this sentence that better sometimes is enemy of good, is the enemy of the good. And better is sometimes the enemy of the good. The original is in French, I don't recall it literally. But it's kind of an interesting way of thinking. There is a level of satiation with the good, which I think is good enough.
Maybe I don't need to find it, I can find it later. I have a lot of sympathy for where you're coming from, but I'm going to defend Whitehead and Nietzsche. I think the reason that I've been so taken by the function of reason is because of this question. And where Whitehead makes that difference between living well and living better. But it's not, I want to argue, at all in the range of neoliberal understanding of better. Because to live better for Whitehead is to not adhere to methodology. So what Whitehead is saying is that to live better is to live in the contrast, where education does the work of what we heard before. So the better has to do with the anarchic share that composes with life in its continual revaluing of itself, which is how I understand the eternal return, but I'm not going to defend Nietzsche here. And I think I'm going to just come to this, because I'm completely sympathetic to what you say, but what I found is that these questions can be asked generally. So what it means if you're autistic and excluded from education is different than if you're a middle-class Danish person who has access to an incredible richness that, do you know what I mean? It makes a difference. And so one of the things I think about in the context of the work that we do, and it's definitely the question of the Three Ecologies Institute, is what are the conditions that allow for the living to happen? How much of your life is spent paying rent? Like how much of your investment monthly is given to those kinds of resources? And how much weather is there for experimentation? And one of the conversations we've had a lot with our Nordic collaborators is that they have a tendency to not do work if they don't get funded, just for example. This is completely unthinkable for someone from Quebec. There's no money there. Or for someone from Italy, I'm sure. Or for someone, like people who come from economies that are Brazil or whatever. This is just crazy, you know? If you didn't do work because it wasn't funded, you'd never work, right? But then what do? Well, you create degrowth. You create constellations that allow for the work to happen. And so I often think that, and then some of us, like Anna, would say that was living better, right? I mean, I'm saying this because I think it's so important to have this conversation, was sort of linked to what we were talking about with Michael yesterday. I'm really resistant to giving neoliberalism my vocabulary. I completely understand that they've taken it over. Creativity and belief and so on, but fuck that. Like, why did they get it? Why can't we make it do the work that it is already doing in so many of our environments? So I just want to throw that in with real sympathy for what you're saying.
Thank you for that. But this is a way of the repetition and shifting, right? Because we can reappropriate the concept of better in a way, but not in the narrative of, but it's not quantitative more, is qualitative better. But qualitative better per se is not yet what we're talking about. And I love your condition for livability, because this is the better. Maybe it is the good. So having a high concept of the good, the basic condition for livability, for workability, and livability is not just barely surviving. Livability includes creativity. It not includes flourishing. Opening spaces of possibility. So livability is that. It's not just having food and shelter and
philosophy.
Thank you. Absolutely, yes. Yes. Can you speak up a little bit? I have problems in hearing.
Yeah, just speaking from experience, and I am a subject of neoliberal capitalism, so I am entrepreneurial, and I have done all kinds of different projects and tried different things as experiments to see what works and doesn't. And I think there's actually an opportunity, using the entrepreneurial language, to reappropriate entrepreneurship to actually go against it. And I think there's a way to also, I was going to say, reappropriate the language and to move things forward and to attempt other things and still framing it in a accessible way that people are not running from degrowth. It's not saying growth or better or whatever, but you can kind of manipulate the language in a way to accommodate a population that has been subjected to this environment.
Thank you. Yeah, totally. And we are all subjects to and of neoliberal narrative. It's not just the entrepreneurs technically. But there's also a manner, can we be appropriate that I know a bunch of entrepreneurs who are trying to move against the growth diktat, which is interesting, because that breaks all the structure of what an entrepreneur is supposed to be doing. Grow or die.
Yes. Although it might help if we didn't treat neoliberalism as a thing.
Oh, well, yeah. Sure.
No, but as a way of doing things.
Yes.
I mean, because capitalism isn't a thing. I mean, and it's strange. You learn the terminology and you forget what it means. When Marx talks about mode of production, it's a mode. It's a manner of producing. It's an adverbial. It's a way. I mean, this is something that stings up that people talked about. That if you treat neoliberalism as a thing, then you're going to. I'm not saying you. I'm just saying people. How to overcome it? You're treating it as an object. You've misrecognized the character of what you're actually trying to deal with. Whereas if you stop recognizing it, it's a manner, it's a mode, it's a way of doing things, then the techniques
No, thank
are
you so much.
required.
I sometimes really run into the limits of language because the language is representative and I don't know how else. But yeah, totally. Thank you. Sure. What's the order?
I'm struck by this concept of the unintelligible subject, which I often feel very close to. And it reminds me of a problem I run into frequently teaching Gertrude Stein, for example. Someone says Stein's writing is unreadable, which is an assessment you can only make if you've read it or tried to read it. So there's this kind of contradiction built into the idea of unintelligibility, that you have to, it's intelligible enough for you to make the decision that it's unintelligible. And so I'm very interested in what, not knowing anything at all about Judith Butler, I read in that presence, unintelligible presence, a kind of effect in a different dimension, like a sort of interference pattern that produces or constructs that might cause or bring into existence an emotion of some sort, whether it be hostility or sadness or loss. That maybe is the role of, or a role, a disruptive role of unintelligibility or unreadability, is the breach that it opens, that requires a sort of then decision about acceptance or rejection.
Thank you.
Can I chip in very quickly? In good news, Butler is a great fan of Stein. And to get back to what I was saying before, one reason might precisely be because she's ungrammatical. But she isn't. But she is. But she isn't. And it's about meaning, but it's about the meaning which comes from the utter attention that she pays to the way she's ungrammatical, which is important.
Thank you. Great.
Sandra and then
Sandra.
Well, I just wanted to comment on your statement that it's neoliberalism is not a thing. And I'll tell you just a quick vignette that so my husband and I are also looking forward to establishing a small college, an ultra small college. We met a few weeks ago with representatives from SCORE, which is a small business mentoring, national mentoring group. And our encounter, our two SCORE members turned out to be ex-military and had no background really in education, in terms of education as a system or, and when we went to describe what we were doing, we used language like sustainability, post-industrial, God forbid if we used degrowth. And the reaction was, first of all, those are buzzwords, and all of that came out of the sense that neoliberalism is not, that it's an ideology, and it not just an ideology, but it's like it is a it has some kind of form. It's like an action figure. It's a real thing. It's the way they understand it.
I would really use the term pattern in a Whiteheadian sense. It's a very strong pattern that we keep reiterating. It's not a thing, it's not an entity, but it's a self-materializing pattern. And it keeps being reiterated by our actions, thought, moods. It has an incredible materiality to it, but it's not something that you can take there and say, let's look at neoliberalism and analyze that, because it's embodied, in what I wear, right? It's just my skin. Yeah.
Yeah, just wanted, just two things. The first one is that I really don't feel that the phrase that we are living, that we are situated within those narratives, whether we want it or not, is adequate for a description of experience. I would say that the narratives interfere with how we are living, but they are not what we are. I really strongly have to reject that the positions are already in place and that we move within what's already there. But yes, I just wanted to say that short thing. And the other one about the word better, it's just that when Whitehead is talking about a better life, it comes from a different value system already, which is, from my own perspective also as a Mexican, it's a value system that talks a lot about, in the sense that we talk about the good life. So it's not a value system that considers better as an already known entity of what better is, but actually as an invented action, something that has to be invented. When Whitehead talks about these three stages, like to live well, to live better, he talks about something that I really like, which is like, first we have to be alive. So this is to live. First we have to be alive. Secondly, to be alive in a satisfactory way. And again, the satisfactory is from satisfaction, from an energized kind of living. And then thirdly, which is the living better, to acquire an increase in satisfaction. So it's an increase, and all of these are operative terms, so they are related with what he calls the three ways of living, which is related to what you were saying about modalities. So these modalities of blindness, modality of rhythm and modality of transience, where transience, it's a kind of mentality of pushing forward, but with the blindness, pushing forward with the patterning.
Thank you. I just was thinking of the word satisfaction, which means to make something enough. There is an activity in that. It's not, so make it enough, you can translate into equality and justice, right? And so, yeah. No, thank you for that. I wanted to be provoking about the narrative of the better.
Maybe Brian, and then we need to conclude because lunch is waiting and people are signaling their hunger. Lack of satisfaction.
It's going to go back to the thing. And I think Michael's suggesting a kind of modal logic, or logic that sort of differentiating between modalities helps a lot. So I don't want to give terms that used to be terms that animate the left, like creativity, over to capitalism, neoliberalism. But the problem you talked about is a real problem that's been bothering me for a long time, that capitalism really does appropriate creativity, and it appropriates notion of notions of the better, but it appropriates them under a certain mode. So if you think of it that way, you don't have to say, well, get rid of creativity. You just have to reinvent the mode that goes against that mode.
Or to shift it and make other modes possible.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you.